Hey, what's going on? It's D-Lils, and this is another episode of Spread State University, where we break down every matchup for this particular NFL week. We're here. It's NFL Week 1. We're going to get right into the data. I don't like to really prolong things. I like to get right into the numbers and the metrics so that we have time to respond from the viewers' questions. So we're going to get right into it. And before we get into the matchups, if you have not watched the video that breaks down all the modules for Pro Football Forensics, I encourage you to do that. That way you know how to use each and every module within an app to make the best prediction and really make the best plays for your sports wager or for your fantasy football picks. So without further ado, I want to get into some high-level Week 1 stuff before we get into the games, right? And so Week 1's coming up. There's a lot of metrics that you should know about. We know right now that the Jets were selected for Hard Knocks. We've seen Aaron Rodgers in the group on Hard Knocks for the last few weeks. So a couple things with Hard Knocks, Since 2018, the team that is selected for Hard Knocks during the preseason is 6-0 against the spread. You can go back all the way to 2018 and you'll see every team has covered that Week 1 game. We'll go back to that when we get to the Jets and Bills for this upcoming week. Another thing to note, we know that every year there's at least 6 new playoff teams throughout the playoffs. Last year was no different. However, let's talk about the teams that did not win the playoffs or did not get into the playoffs last year. Since 2017, 6 teams have made the playoffs at least once but missed the playoffs in a minimum of 3 consecutive seasons. So we're looking at teams that missed the playoffs year 1, year 2, year 3, but since 2017 have made the playoffs at least once. Okay? Now, during the same span, in Week 1 of the following season, after missing at least 3 consecutive seasons, okay, those teams were 2-4 straight up and against the spread. Now, this is how I want you to analyze this particular metric. These are bad teams or bad franchises who have not won for a long period of time. Not have gone to the playoffs, whatever the case may be. When we take a look at what they've done Week 1 after missing the playoffs 3 consecutive years, those teams typically do not win, nor do they cover. Now, here's the kicker. In this span, again, this is going back since 2017. During the span, 2 of those teams have won. What 2 teams have won? Well, the Washington football team, and it's the year they changed their name, and the Las Vegas Raiders, the year they moved literally from Oakland to Las Vegas. So the common comparison here, the only 2 teams that broke this trend are teams that were undergoing significant change in their organization. And that doesn't apply. These are the teams that would fit this metric this upcoming season. Atlanta, Carolina, Denver, Detroit, the Jets, and Houston. Think about that. Have any of those teams undergone significant makeover in the organization or maybe change ownership? It's not just a quarterback coming in or a particular player or a new coaching staff. It would have to be something significant, a name change, a stadium change, ownership sells a team, something. And I don't believe that in this set of teams that we see anything that is truly alarming from that. But just something to note. So we're going to get into the first 2 matchups here that we offer on the app for free. And then we'll offer that video on YouTube to the public, and then we'll go over the other 14 Week 1 matchups for our premium members that are premium on the Pro Football Forensics app. So, without further ado, let's get into our first matchup. It's Thursday night, and that's going to be Detroit at Kansas City. Right now, Detroit is a 6.5-point underdog to Kansas City being the favorite. The algorithm has this as a Chiefs minus 1.5, so it's slightly lower than what the actual sports books have it at, which favors the Lions clearly. And if we get into these metrics here, let's get into some of these metrics for this particular game. It's a lot of things that come to mind. First of all, Jared Goff, 6-0 against the spread in Week 1. Jared Goff was a rookie in 2016 with the Rams a year before Sean McVay took over, and he has covered the spread every week he's been in the NFL. And I think that's something important to denote here. Also, since 2014,
When the Lions defeat the Packers the following game, they're 5-0 straight up and against the spread. This is going back since 2014. We're coming up on 9 years. In the past 9 years, and this is Aaron, most of the time that they have beaten the Packers, that was an Aaron Rodgers led team. I think there was one year in particular that Aaron Rodgers sat out a lot of games or nearly the whole season. But for the most part, this occurs when teams defeat Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, right? So again, since 2014, when the Lions specifically, some of that was Matt Stafford, some of that is Jared Goff. When the Lions defeat the Packers the following game, they're 5-0 straight up and against the spread. As you know, last year, Week 17, they took out the Packers and essentially ruined their playoff opportunities. And I believe the Vikings were able to not only secure the division and then let someone else sneak into the playoffs. So, just something to note. Patrick Mahomes has never lost a season opener. He's 4-1 against the spread, however. And when the Chiefs face a non-conference opponent at home, they're 10-1 straight up. What I believe is going to happen, I see the Chiefs winning this game, but I see Detroit covering, and I'm going to go with the score of KC. I'm looking at KC 34, Detroit 30. Okay, and it could even be a field goal game, but I do think that Detroit is going to cover that 6.5 points. Go ahead and lock that in. Now, from another free game perspective, and for this free game, I'll give you the line tracker data analysis as well, in addition to line tracker statistics. But the other free game that we're offering for this week is San Francisco at Pittsburgh. You already know, anytime that you have a West Coast team traveling to East Coast, the metrics are overwhelmingly 72% or more for that West Coast team not to cover the spread or win outright. And we're going to get into some of those more specific metrics. The thing here is, though, if you just base your pick based off of the algorithm alone, I'm going to tread lightly and be careful of that. The AI generated line is 10.5 points favored to San Francisco, which is way more than the 3.5 that FanDuel has it. And so I'm just going to caution you on that. When you actually take a look at the line tracker, that AI line is way higher than the DraftKings line and the PFBF line, which is the Pro Football Forensics on the house line. And so one thing I want to point out, anytime that you see the algorithm line higher than the Sportsbook line and the PFBF line, it's probably a good line, but leans towards the favorite. Okay, and in this case, that's San Francisco. However, I'm going to tell you why there's a couple things that are different. One, this line started at 2.5, and a lot of sports books have moved it down to 2, and you can find a 1.5 in a few places as well. You have Purdy coming off of a Tommy John surgery, essentially, coming back into the lineup. They are heavy. There's a lot of public money on San Francisco. Here's where I would caution you to be careful. The 49ers, since 2017, and for those who do not know, 2017 was the year that Kyle Shanahan started coaching the Niners. Since he's been the coach, the 49ers are 1-5 against the spread in their season opener, and when they're favored, they're 0-3 against the spread. They do not cover season openers, and you remember last year, they were overwhelmingly favored against the Chicago Bears, right? And you got to look at what's going on. Why do they start out slow? Why do they give up early season upsets and don't show that dominant effort that they have to build in over time? Typically, someone's hurt, right? You had a situation where you've had hurt quarterbacks. You have had a shuffle at running backs until Christian McCaffrey got there. You had running backs that were constantly hurt. They used Jeff Wilson. They used a lot of other people as well, Sherfield. And then from a just overall defensive standpoint, you haven't had continuity all the time. Defensive stars have been injured as well. So, very important to note. Also important to note, when Shanahan faces a top 5 DVOA, that stands for defensive value over adjusted. That is a Football Outsiders metric. When Shanahan faces a top 5 DVOA, rush team specifically, the 49ers are 2-5 straight up and against the spread. Pittsburgh finished number 6 last season. They don't do well with teams that stop the run and have the metrics to back up stopping the run. Also, since 2016, quarterbacks who have less than 8 previous career starts were 10, 1, and 14 straight up in their first week 1 start. Brock Purdy did not start week 1 last year with the Niners. This will be his first official week 1 start. And specifically for quarterbacks who did not have offensive coordinators, you got to know Kyle Shanahan is also the pseudo offensive coordinator for the Niners. Those players were 0-4 straight up. This has upset written all over it. Mike Tomlin is 26-10 when facing a quarterback with less than 20 starts, 3-1 straight up in week 1. I really like Pittsburgh to pull the upset here. I think that I just really like this game. Tomlin's he's only faced Kyle Shanahan once in his career. He's 0-1 straight up, but he's 1-0 against the spread. 2.5 points is small, but again, considering they are coming across country, Shanahan doesn't start out well. I see this as a surprise upset. I think that if you want to take Pittsburgh money at -2.5 even, I think they can win by a field goal. In terms of a score for this particular game, that would be tough. I'm leaning towards let's see right here, 20 starts. When Kyle Shanahan faces a quarterback with less than 20 starts in his career, his team is 15-7. He's never defeated a quarterback with less than 20 starts in week 1. He lost last year 10-19 against Justin Fields. Previous year, he lost 20-24 against Kyler Murray. He doesn't do good with these young, explosive quarterbacks, and everything that I'm hearing about Kenny Pickett right now favors Pittsburgh getting this win. Again, going back to a score, I could see a Pittsburgh 22, San Francisco 17. Okay, go ahead and lock that in. Now, if you are if you're just a regular YouTube subscriber, or if you're a free member of the app, thank you for listening in. If you're a premium member, enjoy the next 14 games. Thanks a lot. Okay, and we're back. First off, I want to thank you all. If you're watching this content early on in the week, that means you are a premium subscriber to the Pro Football Forensics app. And first off, just want to give my gratitude and thank you all for not only downloading but paying for the premium subscription. I hope you are winning. And if you are winning, take a screenshot and post your winnings and tag at Pro Football Forensics on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter at PFBF Forensics. And you can find us at youtube.com/Pro Football Forensics as well. And we're on the Bleacher Report app. So, under Spread State University. So, again, we're going to get right back into these games. We are not going to waste any time. There's a lot of games and a lot of different metrics that we want to break down. So, we have Carolina at Atlanta. We have two very young and experienced quarterbacks that are facing off against one another. And the metrics are very telling. Starting with the algorithm. The algorithm and AI generated line is Falcons -6. It strongly favors the Falcons to not only win this game, but to cover. And the PFBF line is also higher than the FanDuel line. And so with those two metrics, it's leaning towards the Falcons just from a data perspective. But if we actually look at the fact checker, we also see a lot of things. Since 2010, quarterbacks who were drafted number 1 overall are 0-2-7 straight up. Let me say this again. Since 2010, no number 1 overall drafted quarterback has won his week 1 matchup. So go ahead and fact check me. These are the quarterbacks who have been drafted since 2010, number 1 overall. Sam Bradford, Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and this past year, Bryce Young. Those are 10 quarterbacks. This is what they've done. Take a listen. Men lie, women lie, numbers do not. 2010, Sam Bradford, first game, lost 13-17 against Arizona Cardinals. Did not cover, and it was an under. Cam Newton lost to the Cardinals. Guess again. The very next year, lost 21-28. 7.5 points, did not cover. I'm sorry, it was a 6.5 point spread, and he did not cover, and it was over 38. Andrew Luck, first game, lost by 20 points. This is the great Andrew Luck, 21-24. I'm sorry, 21-41 at the Bears. Did not cover, over 42. Jameis Winston lost at Tennessee versus Mariota, who was drafted right after him, 14-42, did not cover. Jared Goff lost at San Francisco, 0-28. I mean, guys are barely getting to 22 points in their debut. No cover. Baker Mayfield covered. Okay? He covered, but did not win or lose. He tied Pittsburgh in his debut, 21-21, where a game, it was at home in 2018, and it was the over 40. And again, no one has won. You could tie, but you have not won if you're a number one overall drafted quarterback since 2010. Joe Burrow, I'm sorry, after Baker, we had Kyler Murray, another odd tie against Detroit. That was a home game, 27-27. He covered because they were underdogs, and the over was 46. Joe Burrow in 2020 lost to the Chargers 13-16, did not cover, and it was an under game. And then Trevor Lawrence lost his opening day game by 16 points at Houston, 21-37, no cover, or over 45. I'm not looking for Bryce Young to break that trend. I have no reason to believe that he's any different than any of these other number one drafted quarterbacks. They were all highly anticipated coming out of their respective universities. I see Bryce Young losing this game. Frank Wright, who is the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, is 0-4-1 straight up as a head coach. It actually should be 0-1. He has one tie. And those were all with Indianapolis Colts as well. Since 2016, only one quarterback has actually won on the road in his first start, which entered the season with a new head coach. Granted, Panthers have a new head coach, new offensive and defensive coordinators, okay? There's only one quarterback who won his first game with all of that. New head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. That was Jalen Hurts. Since 2016. So a lot of metrics are not favoring the Panthers. The Falcons don't have any overwhelming metrics that make me want to lean towards their side, but it's just the odds are not in the favor of Bryce Young, Frank Wright, and not having a true number one threat at the running back position or the wide receiver position. I'm definitely going with Atlanta to not only win, but cover in this matchup. And if you want my score, go ahead and look on the app. My score will be up there on Wednesday of this week. Moving on. The next matchup that we have this week will be the Houston at Baltimore. This is one of my favorite matchups. The data overwhelmingly points to Baltimore. I don't even need to get into the algorithm, which is more than the line itself. Or the line tracker, which looks really different. But you'll see how it's looking next week when we have these updated lines, because I think the public is also really on Baltimore's side as well. This is another case where you have a rookie quarterback, a new head coach, new defensive coordinator. It's not really, the metrics say that that's not a good bet to take for that young quarterback to cover, let alone playing the Ravens, let alone playing the Ravens at home, at the bank. It gets very hostile in there on a Sunday in September in Baltimore. Out of the 22 quarterbacks, right? So since 2010, there are 22 quarterbacks who started game one as a rookie. Okay. Now, I didn't say number one overall drafted quarterbacks. I'm talking about just quarterbacks in general who started game one as a rookie. So since 2010, 22 quarterbacks, first true game of their career. Those quarterbacks went 6-1-15 straight up. Now, out of those 22 quarterbacks, 8 of them had rookie head coaches. Those quarterbacks went 1-1-6 straight up. And that out of those 6 losing quarterbacks, 5 started on the road, and only 2 quarterbacks kept it within a touchdown. The metrics do not favor Houston at all in this matchup. Now, let's look at Baltimore's overwhelming statistical advantage against these incoming Texans. Since 2018, when the Ravens open up in the bank, they're 2-0 straight up and against the spread. that since Lamar's been the quarterback, okay? Both games had a point differential of 32 points or more. When Lamar Jackson opens up week 1 in Baltimore, those teams get blown out. That is fact. That's factual evidence. He's done it every single time. He's 4-1 straight up and against the spread in week 1. The Ravens have scored 27 plus points and won by 32 points, and 3 out of those 4 wins held their opponent under 11 points in all 4 wins. No one has gotten more than 11 points in Baltimore in week 1. These are facts. Men lie, women lie, numbers do not. Since 2018, Coach Harbaugh is 5-1 straight up and 4-2 against the spread when playing an opposing rookie head coach. Half of the games, the Ravens won by 21 plus points. The Ravens are going to blow the Texans out. It's going to get ugly. This is the most highly confident rated game out of all the week 1 matchups. The stats overwhelmingly lean towards Baltimore. I am anticipating a score of Baltimore, 37, Houston 10. I see it being a 27-point game with Lamar. Lamar might not play in the fourth quarter. I think halftime, they'll start by half. It may be like a 14-0 game. Ravens get off to a slow start. Maybe 17-0 because I could see Tucker getting a field goal, or 13. He might get 2 field goals. And then they open up the second half and really make space. So I like the Ravens there. Moving on to our next game we have this week. We have Cincinnati against Cleveland. One thing is for sure, 2 things for certain. The Browns' algorithm metrics are very close correlated. They have a very high correlation in terms of forecasting games for the Browns for whatever reason. The last 2 years they've been 2-0 straight up and against the spread from an algorithm perspective, and this year the algorithm has the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay. Now this is contingent on Burrow. As of right now, this is September 2nd, 4 o'clock. As of right now, Burrow is scheduled to play. He's been hobbled for the last few weeks of the preseason, but he's scheduled to go out there and perform. If all is well, I believe it ends well for the Bengals. If he is gimpy, that could change a lot of things. Because this, from a statistical standpoint, this has an upset written all over it. Let's look at some of the numbers. When Jamar Chase plays on the road in the first 3 weeks of the season, he's never had more than 65 yards receiving. I would stay away from Jamar from a fantasy football standpoint. And another thing, from a Bengals just lost to Mahomes, and when teams lose to Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, week 1 of the following season, they're 2-5 against the spread. So there's hope, but the metrics don't lean towards the Bengals in that instance. But what I will say is that Orlando Brown is 4-0 straight up. 4-0 straight up as a week 1 starter. 3 out of the 4 wins were by 23 plus points. Of course, those were all with different teams, both with the Ravens and with the Chiefs. But I look at Orlando. There is an Orlando Brown effect on your team, especially early on in the year when he's healthy. You cannot deny the force that he is on the offensive line, and I think that he'll make a significant impact. Myles Garrett statistically does not have the imprint that a TJ Watt has on games, and not to mention Deshaun Watson has never won a week 1 matchup in his career. He's 0-4 straight up. Everything points to the Bengals winning this game. I'm not going to give you a score. You can look on the house tab on Wednesday of this upcoming week, and you'll be able to see my score prediction for this game. But what I will say is that take a look at the under. Potentially, Jamar Chase plays on the road in the first 3 weeks. The point total has typically been under 40 points, and that's happened at least 4 times. When the Bengals play week 1 and Joe Burrow's starting, the under is 44 points. When teams lose to Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, week 1 the following season, the point total is under 45 points in 71% of those games. I believe that if 45 points is low, I know, for these 2 teams, especially with the Bengals and their high-powered offense. But if you want to tease that up to 47.5, I would say that would be a good pick. So instead of giving you a score, I'm going to give you the under 47.5 for Cleveland at home against Cincinnati. Next game, We're going to take a look at Jacksonville at Indianapolis. Again, two young quarterbacks. Have to take a look at that. A lot of different metrics here, and I think you'll be surprised with how I'm leaning. First of all, from an algorithm standpoint, overwhelmingly leans towards Jacksonville. We knew this, even though that the line is 3.5. We knew that it was going to be a little suspect from that perspective. I think that one thing that you should take into account is that the PFBF line is actually less than the actual FanDuel line, and that lets you know that this is probably a good number. I think that the Jacksonville minus 3.5 is a good number, but I think that half points might cost you. And I think 3 points might push. I could see Jacksonville winning by 3 here. But let's get into what do the metrics tell us? What do the fact check tell us? Well, fact check tells us that Doug Peterson is a head coach. He's 4-2 straight up in the season opener. But the last 3 road openers, he's 0-3 straight up and against the spread. Okay. And now that dates back to his time with the Eagles as well, right? And he had Carson Wentz as a quarterback. So I would just say take that with a grain of salt. When Peterson's team is favored, when Peterson faces a rookie head coach, his teams are 6-4 straight up, 4-7 against the spread. However, when Peterson's team is the favorite, they're 1-6 against the spread. And again, this is more towards Peterson. Trevor Lawrence has only been in the league 2 years. There's not a ton of metrics. They've been a pretty losing team, especially if you look at the Urban Meyer metrics. So we look at the Indianapolis Colts side of the ball, and again, that rookie metric comes back into play with quarterbacks who started game one as a rookie since 2010 or 6-1-15. However, a couple of things to note here. Since 2016, quarterbacks who have less than 8 previous career starts, although they were 10-1-14 straight up in their first week, all 4 quarterbacks that had a new head coach, offense, and defensive coordinator went undefeated. They were 4-0 straight up. And what we see here, the Colts have a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. And just so you all know, for those who want to fact check me, last year, Frank Reich got fired after 9 games. After 8 games, Jeff Saturday took over for the last 8. And this year we have Shane Steichen, Jim Bob Cooter. I know you guys remember him from Detroit. Is the new offensive coordinator. The new defensive coordinator is Gus Bradley. And so he's coming back as a defensive coordinator. But overall, what we've seen is that in these instances, teams typically go 4-0 straight up. Okay. In terms of an overall pick, this is going to be tough. I personally have low confidence on this meter. I would probably stay away from this game. I think Jacksonville could win by a field goal. And again, it is a division game in week 1. You can't ignore that aspect of it as well. But again, if you just look at the numbers since 2019, the Jags are 1-3 straight up and against the spread in their season opener. There's just not a ton of good metrics that lean towards taking Jacksonville. I would stay away from it. If you're going to make me make a pick, I'm taking Indiana, and I might tease it up from 3.5 to 4.5. I could see a 24-20 game here. But we don't have a high confidence in. If we get some new numbers before the end of this week, I'll make sure that you guys see that on the Pro Football Forensics app. Look out for more data later. Moving on, we're about halfway through the slate here. Our next game here is Tennessee at New Orleans. You have a lot of new players. DeAndre Hopkins coming in for Tennessee. You have Derek Carr coming in for New Orleans. You have Michael Thomas coming back. A lot of things are going to be looking different about this metric. Here's where the algorithm comes in and has an interesting selection. The algorithm has the Saints as a pick'em here, as opposed to FanDuel, and most sites have the Saints as a 3.5 point favorite. And that's a little interesting given that you look at the lack of success they had last season under Dennis Allen and the success that the Titans have had typically when Derrick Henry's healthy and Ryan Tannehill's healthy, which are both coming back to be week 1 starters. With the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, Vrabel has kept the Titans pretty competitive early on in the year. And it's just very interesting when we take a look at the line tracker and you see that the FanDuel line is larger than both the PFBF line and the algorithm line. from a line tracker perspective, right? From only talking from a data perspective before we look at any facts on this particular matchup. When you see that the sportsbook line is higher than both the algorithm line and the PFBF line, it typically points towards an upset. Okay, or at least an underdog cover. But a lot of times, depending on that space, and there's not really that much space, they're pretty close. But I do like the cover here from the Titans. But again, this is a tricky one. Let's take a look at some of the metrics here. Since 2019, when the Titans are underdogs between 3 and 3.5 points, they're 6-3-1 against the spread. That's a significant number. That's a significant number. And in 2021, okay, so the first year coming out of the pandemic, when teams miss the playoffs and start week 1, the following season with the same starting quarterback, they are 6-2 straight up. And these are only active quarterbacks, right? So out of 8 active quarterbacks who missed the playoffs since 2021 and are actually starting week 1 of this following season, those quarterbacks are 6-2 straight up, and that fits Ryan Tannehill right here. The last time the Titans faced this defensive coordinator, Woods, who used to be the defensive coordinator from the Browns in 2018 2019, from 2020 and 2021, I believe. The last time the last time that Vrabel faced the Browns, or have scored more than 20 points in week 1 was their matchup against the Browns. That was in 2016 where they won 43-13. And so you take a look at these metrics. Derek Carr being 0-4 straight up when facing Ryan Tannehill head to head. I think you slightly have to take the points here. I think if you can get 3.5 points with the Titans, I don't see where the Saints, from a defensive perspective, are going to be able to shut down both the rushing attack of Derrick Henry and the potential impact that DeAndre Hopkins is going to make for the Titans. They've never been a team that have too many wide receiving weapons. And so I think that Derek Carr not getting the win against Tannehill, I don't see that happening in his first time out with a brand new head coach. What I do like here is the points. And I think that when you take a look at the week 1 points, this defensive coordinator from the Saints has typically given up the last 2 seasons. In the first 2 weeks, he's given up at least 21 or more points. Also having given up 24, 33, and 31 points. So he typically gives 30 points on average in the first 2 weeks of the season. I could see the Titans starting off. They have a lot of continuity on their roster, especially offensively. I could see them getting off to a good start. I'm not going to give you my score, but I do like the over. I do like the over for Tennessee and New Orleans. If you want to tease it down a couple of points just to be on the safe side, you can. But I like the over for Tennessee and New Orleans. Moving on. We have Arizona at Washington. Very unique matchup. We don't know who's going to start for the Cardinals yet. They cut Colt McCoy. Washington's going to start Sam Howell. A lot of new things going on. I would say that the same metric, again, for the new defensive coordinator and rookie quarterbacks goes into effect. Those players were 4-0 straight up. This would not count if Joshua Dobbs is a starting quarterback. We would not analyze that metric accordingly. We would take into account only if their rookie quarterback starts. When we take a look at Washington, and here's, I think, where it gets a little tricky from the Commanders. Since 2010, there are 10 quarterbacks who started week 1 who had less than 5 starts, but at least 1 start in the previous season or in their career. Okay? These are quarterbacks who have played less than 20 games. So they played in less than 20 games, but they started at least 1, but less than 5. Those quarterbacks that were favored never won their week 1 matchup. And Sam Howell is not only favored, they're favored by 6.5. And I think some places that number has already gone up to 7. That is not a good component of success when you're taking a look at quarterbacks this young. Since 2014, teams that are favored at home by 6.5 points in week one are 1-6 against the spread. I think this is way too many points. I'm not saying that the Washington Commanders can't get the win, but I do have doubts about them covering that many points. And I think just a lot of things could happen. I think that, overall quarterback starting week one with that few starts in their career could equal a disaster, and definitely should not be favored. I think that Arizona could pull the upset here. I have an upset score of Arizona 24-15. I really like the under here. So if you can get the under at 44 or even 45 points, go. Okay, moving on in our slate. Our next game, we have Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Minnesota Vikings. Real interesting matchup. A lot of turnover on both teams with star players. Um, no longer Dalvin Cook to support the Kirk Cousins project in Minnesota. Tom Brady gone from Tampa Bay. New offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich. That doesn't typically bode well for players when you have a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback in a particular season. But excuse me, let's take a look at the metrics here. First of all, the algorithm only has a slight advantage to Minnesota, which I was expecting, not really knowing the value of where uh, Baker Mayfield is on the quarterback chart. Last year, he looked very inconsistent up and down with the Rams in his few starts that he had. Coming in here, he has roughly, I would say, equatable weapons. Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. If you take a look at it, I don't think the metrics really favor Baker Mayfield in terms of having more or additional weapons here. So when we also take a look at the fact checker, one of the things that pop out to me is that Baker Mayfield has never won a week one start. So if he didn't win one with the Browns in the couple seasons that he had there with weapons, Jarvis Landry, Odell, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, uh, he did not win it with the Panthers when he had a Christian McCaffrey and a DJ Moore. I don't expect him to win it against a Kirk Cousins coming back. They had a pretty good offseason. And so when I look at this metric and I look at the other side, unfortunately, Minnesota is very inconsistent when they start the year off. Kirk Cousins is 3-5 straight up and against the spread when starting week one. As a Viking, however, he's 3-1 straight up. So most of those losses came when he was with the Washington team. And his only loss since he's been with the Vikings week one was against Aaron Rodgers. Since 2014, teams that are favored at home by 6.5 points in week one are 1-6 against the spread. Again, we see this metrics. We saw this with the Washington Commanders again previously. When Dalvin Cook misses a game, we know that he's now with the Jets. They're 3-5 straight up, 2-4 straight up at home. So we got to really see Alexander Mattison and how he performs now as a lead back with the expectations of a lead back. It's not coming off the bench, just giving spot minutes here. But I will say that speaking of Alexander Mattison, when he starts and has at least 95 yards, the Vikings are 3-0 straight up. So that is good. I would just say for measure, since 2010, out of the four previously drafted number one quarterbacks, right? And so Baker includes he's one of those four quarterbacks that were drafted number one overall picks that have later changed teams in their career. Their first week one appearance with their new team, they were 3-1 against the spread, 2-2 straight up. And both quarterbacks who were underdogs covered. And again, just want to point that out. I think that the Vikings may have a slow start, and I think they'll later come back to defeat the Buccaneers later in the game. I am skeptical about them covering the spread here. The Buccaneers are returning everyone on defense, essentially, and everybody in their defensive backfield as well. We know when those corners are healthy with Dean and who is the other guy on the other side of the field? I want to say it's Jamel Dean and sorry, it's going to bother me. On the other side, they have Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis III. You have Antoine Whitfield and Ryan Neal. When they have those players and they're on the starting lineup defensively, it doesn't bode well for the other team. So I think that they're going to keep it close, and I think that the Vikings will most likely win by a field goal at the end. You're going to have to go into the Pro Football Forensics app to see my estimated score for that matchup. Moving on to the next week. All right, we're more than halfway through the games. We're looking at Green Bay at Chicago. I've seen a lot of the memes. Jordan Love talking about he's still Happy Father's Day to Jordan Love. I would tread carefully. I am favoring the Packers to cover and potentially upset in this game. Over the past 20 years, when the Packers face the Bears in Week 1, they're 4-1 straight up, and 2-0 straight up and against the spread on the road. Both wins were by 8+ points. 20 years is a long span. You typically don't see this matchup. We've only seen it 5 times, but it's overwhelmingly in the Packers' favor when they match up. I think that when we look at the Chicago side of the ball, Justin Fields' only Week 1 matchup was last year against San Francisco. From an actual metric standpoint, the AI-generated algorithm had Green Bay as a -7. Now, uh, right now, the Bears are a 3.5 point favorite. I think that's way too many points, even despite it's in Chicago. I'm excited to see the improvement with DJ Moore and the year 2 of Justin Fields. But I do think that the uh, Packers have Christian Watson, who's going to be a top 5 receiver this year, and I also think that the Packers defense still has Jair Alexander, and they have a number of returners from last year. I do think that that Chicago offense still has time to gel, and I think that Green Bay will pull it out by a very close margin. This being a division game to open up the year, so um, the last time the Packers replaced a longtime Super Bowl winning quarterback, a la Aaron Rodgers for Brett Favre. They defeated a division opponent 24-19 in the first game, and I'm seeing a very similar score, a 24-20, a 24-19 type of game. Matt LaFleur is 4-2 straight up, 3-3 against the spread when coaching Week 1 as a head coach. So I like the Packers to cover here. Let's take a look at the next game. We have the Las Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. Again, coming back, Jimmy G now starting quarterback for the Raiders. Broncos having Sean Payton now as the head coach. There's a huge metric here that I want to highlight, which is why I am favoring the Broncos to win this game. When a quarterback finishes number 1 in defensive value over adjusted quarterback rankings, according to Football Outsiders, and Jimmy Garoppolo finished number 1 last season, the following season in Week 1, his team is 0-5 against the spread. No quarterback is covered who finished number 1. In previous years, if you take a look at those other quarterbacks who finished number 1, Aaron Rodgers finished, then he lost to the Vikings that year, 7-23. The previous year, Aaron Rodgers, that was 2021, they lost New Orleans 3-38. I mean, we're talking blowouts here. Drew Brees finished number 1 in 2020, and they lost. They beat Tampa Bay 34-23, and they were the lone cover. Actually, they were the lone cover. So to be exact, that should be 1-4 against the spread, and the lone cover coming from Drew Brees. Case Keenum did not cover against the Seattle Seahawks, and in 2019, there was also an over, and that quarterback did not cover as well against Houston, which was 6.5 points. So overall, this doesn't fare well for Jimmy G. When we take a look at it, I think that the Broncos are going to edge them out in a close matchup here. We look at the other stats. Jimmy G is 0-1 straight up when facing the Broncos in his career, and when he's faced Russell Wilson, he's 1-4 straight up. Okay. Um, since 2021, when teams missed the playoffs, like the Broncos did as well, and they start Week 1 the following season with the same starting quarterback, they're 6-2 straight up. Of course, the Raiders had Derek Carr last year, so that would not apply to them starting their same quarterback. I think that the Broncos win in a close matchup. Right now, it's 3.5 point spread. To get my exact actual cover, though, you're going to have to go to the Pro Football Forensics app for that. When we take a look at the actual line tracker metrics, It looks really funky because um, Denver is favored by 2.5 some places. FanDuel has it by 4, but the algorithm actually had Vegas favored, and so I think some of that is the unknown of what Jimmy G is going to bring. And when you take a look at it, he's back with Josh McDaniels, who was his offensive coordinator, and the lone few starts that he had in New England the season that he took over for Brady. Um, I would stay away from this game. Confidence interval is very low in terms of where I see these two teams finishing up in this particular matchup, but I'm leaning towards the Broncos to definitely win. If you want to take Denver on the money line, that's where I am leaning towards based off of the data more specifically. Let's carry on. We have a few more games here. My upset of the week, Miami at the Chargers. I'm taking Miami for so many different reasons. Yes, the algorithm has the Chargers. Taking into consideration the team going from East Coast to West Coast, however, is very unique because that travel time can be booked into that first week. This is not like you're coming off of playing a game, then having a unique practice schedule. You're able to go out there with plenty of time and get ready and prepare and adjust to the West Coast time. So that West Coast time difference does not have as much impact in week one. Tyreek Hill has never lost a week one game in his career. Yes, the majority of his games have been with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, but nonetheless, he's never lost a week one game when he has at least 2 targets and the team wins by double digits in 83% of those matchups. Okay? 83%. All he has to do is get 2 targets. He does not lose a week one game. Since 2018, when a quarterback finishes number 2 in DVOA, the following season, his team is 5-0 straight up and against the spread. Tua finished number 2 overall. Yes, he's had his injury concerns, but he's healthy for week 1. He finishes the game. They finish with a win. Bottom line. Chargers. When the Chargers play at home in the first 3 weeks of the season, they're 1-4 straight up, and that's since 2020. And we've seen since the Chargers have been under the leadership of Brandon Staley, we've seen what they've done in week 1 and early on in the season, and it takes a while for them to really get going. Since 2010, teams that are favored at home between 1 and 2.5 points against a non-division opponent in week 1 are 1-6 straight up and against the spread. These metrics do not look too good. One thing that I do like in this game, just as much as I like the Dolphins, I like the under. The Dolphins play week 1. The point total is under 34 points in 75% of their matchups since 2019. The Chargers play at home in the first 3 weeks of the season. The point total is under 44 points in 80% of their matchups were under 49 points. So I really like the under here. When teams are on the road in week 1 and they're playing on Pacific time, non-California teams, the point total is under in 67% of the matchups. Everything is pointing to an under for this game. So I like Miami over the Chargers, and I really like the under as well. I really like the under for this matchup. Moving on, we have a few matchups left here. Coming to our last 4, we have Philadelphia Eagles at the New England Patriots. The team who finished number 1 in pass defensive DVOA is 6-1 straight up and against the spread in week 1 the following season. We know Philly finished number 1 overall. The AI generated line is Philly minus 11. They really have the AI generated line does not respect Mac Jones at all. I'm going to tell you who I like based off the metrics here. Mac Jones has not won at home prior to week 9 as a starting quarterback against a non-division opponent. I don't see how they get the win here. I do think that the matchup will be competitive, and I do think that it will be an under. When teams lose to Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs in week 1 of the following season, they're 2-5 against the spread. Again, that's 4.5 points in New England. I don't think New England is an easy place to win in week 1. Although I think the Eagles will be prepared. 4.5 is, I think that's a little bit too much. I could see it being a 3-point game, and I could see a final score of something like 21-17 or right on that 4-point line, or even a 2017 game. But I don't see them covering. Okay, I see New England covering in a close matchup here. 21-17 or 20-17 Philly. Okay. Also, guys, just again, since 2020, when teams finished in the top 3 rushing DVOA metric, the following week 1, they're 4-5 against the spread, 5-3-1 straight up. Again, I like Philly to win, but to cover that 4.5 points, win by 5 points, I think that's a bit much in Foxborough, Massachusetts. So I'm leaning towards New England to cover that, and I also like the under. Moving on, we take a look at our last 3 slates. Have another division matchup: the Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. This is a very interesting matchup. Not only do we have a division matchup, not only do we have, coaching genius with Pete Carroll versus Sean McVay. We have a quarterback who was out last year versus a quarterback who overperformed his contract and got paid again. The Rams are 5-1 straight up and against the spread in week 1 since McVay has been their head coach. The only time they didn't cover was last year against Josh Allen. I don't look at Geno in the same light that I look at Josh Allen. I personally do not. When Cooper Kupp starts against the Seahawks in Seattle, the Rams are 3-1 straight up. The Rams have not lost to the Seahawks prior to Week 15 when Cooper Kupp starts. Something else important to denote there. Geno Smith is 3-0 straight up, 2-1 against the spread as a Week 1 starter. Pete Carroll has never lost a Week 1 home opener in Seattle as a head coach. This is a home opener in Seattle. I don't see Seattle losing. I do see the Rams covering. I think that 3.5 points, although it's very close, it's a very hard number. I would probably take that number down to 2.5 if I were you. And if I were a Seattle bettor, I would take that number down to 2.5. I think at 4.5, I have to take the Rams. I think at 3.5, I probably have to take the Rams. Moving on, we have a couple games left here. Dallas at the Giants. When Dak Prescott starts week 1, the Cowboys are 2-5 straight up. Let's take a look at the line tracker. The algorithm line has this way off. The FanDuel line and the PFBF line are way down here. The algorithm line is way up there. Anytime you see that, it's typically a line that you stay away from. You typically want to go to the underdogs in these instances. And so if I take a look at this, when the Cowboys give up 16 points to their opponent in week 1, they're 0-5 straight up. Do I think the Giants are going to get 16 points in week 1? It's tough. I mean, I've seen their new wide receiver talent. I've seen what Saquon looks like since coming back, being very motivated to get a new contract. Daniel Jones, one more year of development. Dak Prescott maybe having a little bit of insecurity with Trey Lance coming in. I think that the Giants can get to 16 points. Now, the thing that the Cowboys have on their side prior to week 4, when the Cowboys are on the road against a division opponent, they're 3-0 straight up and against the spread. They typically have not only won, but covered when Dak Prescott is on the road against a division opponent. I like that. I think that spells resiliency. I think that Saquon is 1-4 straight up when playing week 1. All 4 losses were by a minimum of 5 points. I'm not going to put too much weight on that. He's rushed for 100 yards week 1 twice in his career, I think, and one of those was against the Cowboys. I think he can get 100 yards against the Dallas Cowboys in week 1. And I just think, again, confidence low for the Cowboys to cover that 3.5 points. Confidence very low. In New York, I'm slightly leaning towards the Giants for that 3.5 points. This is another number. If you can get this number at 2.5 for Dallas, go ahead and tease it down to 2.5. I think anything over 3.5, anything over 2.5 is going to make me look towards the Giants. And to get my final score for this game, you will have to look at the updated On the House module on the Pro Football Forensics app this Wednesday. Going on, we have our last game, and that was a Sunday night game, Monday night game. Buffalo at New York Jets. We already told you about the Hard Knocks statistic where teams that are featured on Hard Knocks in the preseason are 5-0 against the spread and straight up. Actually, 6-0, excuse me, since 2018. So this will be the sixth game. But overall, when you take a look at this matchup, um, it's interesting, right? When Aaron Rodgers starts week one, although these were all with the Packers, when he opens up against a division opponent, his team is 6-1 straight up. I think that he's faced the Bills 4 times in his career. The point total was under 45 points in all 4 times. I think that people think this is anticipating it's going to be a high scoring game. I would tease the under here. I would see if you can get this game under 46.5 points. Because I think it is going to be under. I think it's going to be a defensive matchup. Sauce Gardner on Stephon Gibbs, Tre'Davious White on Garrett Wilson. Yeah, Dalvin Cook will be back, but we know that the Bills typically start out the season pretty good. As you know, last year, as you can recall, they dominated the Super Bowl, winning Los Angeles Rams. So the when the Bills are favored by 2.5 points or less, they are 5-1 straight up and against the spread. So I don't want to disrespect the Bills, but I just think that Josh Allen is 0-2 against the spread when facing Aaron Rodgers in his career. I think that, and I think that the sports books respect the Jets. That number has moved. Okay, that number has moved from where it was 3 in the season and early on in the off season to early preseason. It was 2.5, and now it's 1.5 a lot of places. So I think 1.5 you kind of have to take Buffalo. If you get 3.5, I think you take the Jets. I think you take the Jets here, but I think 1.5 is. I think you have to put respect on the Bills' name, and not to mention, right? Aaron Rodgers is on a new team. Yes, we've seen what a lot of these quarterbacks have done over the last 15 years. There have been 5 players to win a Super Bowl as a starting quarterback and start week 1 for another team. Those quarterbacks are 1-4 straight up and against the spread. The only quarterback to win his first matchup with his new team after winning a Super Bowl is Peyton Manning, the great Peyton Manning. Brady lost his. Nick Foles lost his. Flacco lost his. Russell Wilson lost his. It's not as easy as you think just to go pick up on a new team and win your first week 1 matchup. I have the Bills winning. If you can get them at 3.5, I'll take the Jets covering. At 1.5, I'll take the Bills covering. And that's it. Download the Pro Football Forensics app. Obviously, if you're seeing this early on prior to Friday, then you're a premium subscriber. But if you're not familiar, go ahead and download the Pro Football Forensics app. And subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, so you can get alerted when we drop new Spread State University videos. I'm D. Lils. This is another episode of Spread State University Week 1 NFL Breakdown. You guys tune in soon for more updates and data analytics. Peace.
For more facts on the game, be sure to download the Pro Football Forensics app for free today. I get the beat and I shred it.